was like claiming that testosterone poisoned men and that his testosterone was the worst thing. And everyone that liked his movies said, hey, listen, easy for you to say now. You built that career on some of that. So it wasn't, in my opinion, taken that seriously. He may not like it if he hears this, but like, I'm like, it's like when our colleagues are like, oh, I'm no longer going to publish in Nature and Science. I'm going to go to these these open source journals. Like, he got in the National Academy on Nature and Science papers. So like, you're not kidding anybody.
Well, you're making an important point, which is that once I always find it interesting with celebrities, once they become super famous, I can now disclose, I've been depressed or I've been anxious or I've been overwhelmed. But for some reason, they didn't want to take the risk when they were younger in their careers because, again, the perception is like, oh, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, that's weak. And so that's the point. The point is that we raise kids, boys in particular, to believe that these feminine type emotions, which are not feminine by nature, they're just human emotions, are weak. And therefore, that means I'm going to be perceived as not only weak, but potentially homosexual. And that's also a stigma. And so what do? I suppress, I deny, I ignore. Interestingly enough, for women, what the research shows is that much less likely to suppress or deny, much more likely to ruminate.
Couple of things. First of all, I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like the stereotype of gay men being feminine has fallen away somewhat. I grew up, in the skateboarding community. There's Brian Anderson. He was a big expose in the, not expose where they exposed him, where he voluntarily, came out in the New York Times. He's one of the most aggressive, skateboarders out there, aggressive in the skateboarding, right? So he's big dude, So I feel like that stereotype has kind of shifted a bit where people assume that there's a range.
I think that you're ambitious there. I think you're right. I mean, we know.
So being gay is still sissy?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, if you ask 100 people to run like a gay man,
they're still caught in the Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah, they're gonna show you someone who's more feminine or kind of stereotypically feminine, to be honest with you. So while we know, I mean, certainly, I remember when I was 18, I went to a gay bar, and I grew up in New Jersey. It was very homophobic. The only gay person I really knew was my mother's hairdresser, who was very flamboyant. And then I went to this gay bar, and I was like, oh my God, it's like Wall Street executives here, there's football players. It was a total, shift in my perception. Nevertheless, if you ask the majority of people, it's still considered to be, the mindset is feminine.
Got it. Yeah, I guess if you grew up training in gyms, which I did, you're around a lot of like very strong, physically strong, gay men. Yeah. They were kind of early to the gym culture, so maybe my lens on that is a little distorted. There's something interesting around this notion of sissy showing emotion and boys. And earlier we were talking about the movie Stand By Me, a movie I absolutely love. I think it's just like a perfect story. It's a Stephen King story, right? Turned into a movie. I think Rob Reiner wrote that movie.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that movie is the transition because that happens right around puberty and it's right before junior high school it's between junior high and high school. I can't remember. Some transition, and the kids are at different developmental stages. I feel like this is a big part of it where, like, let's say a kid is a little bit more emotional, a little more coddled at home, perhaps. I'm making a lot of assumptions here, and cries in front of a group of boys when you're in the 7th or 8th grade. Some of those boys are because of their stage of maturation, they're not really little kids anymore. They're like, dude, what are you doing? And then you've mixed all those kids together, and because of the way that schools and social dynamics are, that can stay with a kid for a long time. Like being sort of having an emotional expression, that can stick with you for like
Of
2,
course.
3 years of school, right? So I feel like some of this stuff comes about that way, which is very different than like just, I guess, like a hypothetical scenario, an adult male in the business place. Maybe he's new at, where things tend to equalize a bit in terms of maturational stage. And so these are two different things: boys crying versus young men crying versus quote unquote grown men crying.
Again, this is all nurture. So if you go to schools that do our work, I just interviewed a bunch of teenage boys actually. It blow your mind. They have a whole different perception of emotion. I ask them these questions about men and boys, and and their responses are like, "Huh? Like, what's wrong with crying? Like, if you feel like crying, you cry. Like, are you sure?" Even
No ridicule.
no ridicule. I said, "Well, what if you get into a fight? Can you like talk to the kid about what happened and like tell them how you felt when they left you out?" And they're like, "Of course, that's how we grew up." But they grew up in a school that took emotion seriously. They gave them the skills and the resources to do it. It reminds me, actually, I never forget this, since we're on this topic of boys and men. I was in the beginning of my career doing training in emotional regulation in London, outside of London, a very kind of rough and tough neighborhood. And the head mistress, as they call it back then, of the school, she looked at me and she's like, "You know something, Mark? This program's going to turn the boys into homosexuals." I'm like, okay, like where'd that come from? Like I'm thinking to myself, like you need a lot more training than just emotional intelligence, but I'll put that aside for a minute. Anyhow, I said, I'm here. So can we just go and do it? Let me demonstrate it. Not a problem. We go like a fishbowl. Here I am, like the teacher in the middle of the room. I have like 25 teachers around me and like 20 kids in the middle. And I start sharing a story about my life, whatever it was. I was about probably feeling discouraged. I think it was when I first got into the martial arts, it was tough. I was not a tough boy, and I was afraid of my shadow, and I had all this bullying and abuse, and going to a karate studio, it was a big shock for me. I happened to have an amazing teacher who transformed my life and became a career of mine, martial arts. Anyhow, I told a story about that, about how I failed my yellow belt, and I just hated myself. And like, not only was I bullied, but I couldn't even get a freaking yellow belt, discouraged, hopeless. And everybody's looking at me like, where's this going? The teachers, the kids were like glued. They loved hearing the story. And then I said, I'm just curious. Has anyone else ever felt the way I felt? And I said, just raise your hand if you've had that kind of feeling. Every freaking kid in the classroom raised their hand. And of course I look over at that headmistress and I'm like, let's talk later. Kids are dying to express their emotions, boys and girls. We just socialized it. And the socialization piece is really important because even the way fathers talk to their boy children, is different. It's the toughen up, it's da-da-da. They use more feeling words with girls than with boys. We're not born that way. We are socialized into, having these complicated relationships with certain emotions. But it's not something that can't be modified with good instruction.
You're saying this, I'm realizing I internalized so many things that skew my perspective on this. I guess I should say I'm relieved to hear that expression of emotions among boys is more accepted now. I think that's
the generation that's going through this work. The kids who are growing up in places that are not taking emotion seriously are growing up with a more stereotypical way of viewing it. It's got to be infused into your life. You got to have these conversations. You got to be in situations where, like in our work, just to give you an example, like we're really rigorous about teaching this stuff. This isn't just sort of like kumbaya sitting in a circle. Right. This is like, all right, everyone, we've got a problem here. There's, the Gaga pit, which is in these, this thing in schools. There's a kid who nobody is, allowing to participate. That kid feels awful. What's our obligation? What are we supposed to do to handle that? Imagine you're that kid. Imagine you're the one that nobody wants to be, part of the game. Now we're going to get into groups and we're going to think about A, what are the feelings? B, what are the solutions? What do you do for yourself? What do you do for the other person? And it's like rigorous conversations around the techniques, and they got to role play it. And then we ask questions about the role play. It's like, well, what if it goes wrong? What happens if you say this? And they say, go blank yourself. What do you do then? And that's the kind of complex, muscle building we're giving kids in terms of dealing with emotions.
As many of you know, I've been taking AG1 for nearly 15 years now. I discovered it way back in 2012, long before I ever had a podcast, and I've been taking it every day since. The reason I started taking it, and the reason I still take it, is because AG1 is, to my knowledge, the highest quality and most comprehensive of the foundational nutritional supplements on the market. It combines vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, probiotics, and adaptogens into a single scoop that's easy to drink, and it tastes great. It's designed to support things like gut health, immune health, and overall energy. And it does so by helping to fill any gaps you might have in your daily nutrition. Now, of course, everyone should strive to eat nutritious whole foods. I certainly do that every day. But I'm often asked, if you could take just one supplement, what would that supplement be? And my answer is always AG1, because it has just been oh so critical to supporting all aspects of my physical health, mental health, and performance. I know this from my own experience with AG1, and I continually hear this from other people who use AG1 daily. If you would like to try AG1, you can go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to get a special offer. For a limited time, AG1 is giving away 6 free travel packs of AG1 and a bottle of vitamin D3 K2 with your subscription. Again, that's drinkag1 with the numeral 1.com/Huberman to get 6 free travel packs and a bottle of vitamin D3 K2 with your subscription. There is a hardwired bias towards rough and tumble play in males of all species, including ours. I think what you're talking about a little bit is a capacity also for kind of rough and tumble verbal and emotional exchange, which is not necessarily like F you and this and that, but some of that can be in jest. Some of it can be really damaging. There's something interesting that I learned a long time ago. Even in academia, he's now dead, but there was a very famous neuroscientist I'll never forget. Went to my first McKnight meeting. I was so excited to be there. And he came over, he's a pretty large guy, and he grabbed me. And he goes, so where are you? I was picking between laboratories, between this place and that place. He goes, where is it gonna be? And then he kind of gave me his advice. And that was a very comfortable exchange for me, because I grew up with a lot of physical interaction. Usually guys not putting their arm around me and telling me so what's it gonna be kind of thing. But oftentimes, if I interact with somebody that's kind of like an old friend or something, they'll grab my shoulder, just walking by. There's a lot of just kind of physical interaction that just happens. It certainly doesn't feel weird or aversive.
Sure.
And I could see if somebody, for instance, was not used to just a lot of physical interaction with other people, that could feel like a lot. And so I'm wondering nowadays, where are things with respect to sort of just the amount of physical interaction between kids? Are they just feeling and voicing their emotions, but they're at a physical distance? Or are they, seeing one another and handshakes and hugs, what's up? And, or just friendly, the kind of physical banter?
I think it's cultural. There's a lot going on there in terms of, the type of school and, where it is in the United States or in the world. Touch is a cultural thing. But I think, what I want to say about what you said is that rough and tumble is fine. Of course, rough and tumble. But when it becomes a power over, that's when it becomes a problem. When you have no concern for the emotional life of the other. That's
bullying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The dialogue that sort of establishes hierarchy, I guess, is what, if I'm really blunt about it, I just feel like that just happened naturally in my friend group when I was a kid. There were some kids who were more developed and more athletic or better at this or better at that. And we just kind of all fell into place. It wasn't necessarily about being at the apex or being at the bottom.
Or the intention to harm.
Yeah, we sort of formed a team where you understood that this kid was fast and this one was strong and this one was clever and this one was creative. And actually there was a goofy kid on our street who was always the comedian. I think later he actually tried to become a comedian or became a comedian. And everyone just kind of was all right, you didn't expect him to be like the other kid, and you didn't expect yourself to kind of check off all boxes. I wonder the extent to which young males in particular nowadays feel the need to check off all the boxes of what it is to be a guy. Play a sport, be good in school,